Hi, everyone. Welcome to ESG Decoded. We're today in studio with a returning guest, Steven Okun. So glad to have you back.
Great to be in New York.
I know. It's really fun to be in studio today. Our previous episode was probably over a year ago, maybe almost 2 years at this point. And we had talked about ESG from a private equity perspective in Southeast Asia. Steve, who's lived and worked in the space for several decades in Singapore. And we're really excited to welcome him back to hear a little bit more about top trends. This is going to be a quick episode, but at the very end of the episode, we have a very special ClimeCo announcement. So really excited to have you here for that as well. So let's start, Steve. What is the updates or what are the top issues in Southeast Asia today? And we realize this is very broad brush, but from what you're seeing in private equity.
ESG is not theoretical. It's not some concept that you talk about. It is real. And the impacts in Southeast Asia in particular, in emerging ESG areas, is being felt today by investors, by companies and their managers, by their employees, and by their customers. So getting on top of these emerging ESG trends is critical in Southeast Asia. And I think the three that we're focusing on now, because they're impacting us today, are the climate risk. I mean, the climate crisis is upon us. And so there's the physical risk from climate change, and there's also the risk that comes from the transition to a low carbon economy. Then there's the human rights in the supply chain and how that's impacting businesses, especially those that export to the US or the EU. And then the third is the rise of cybersecurity and ransomware attacks against companies in Southeast Asia.
Oh, wow. A lot going on. I love that it's, you make it very concrete. These are real issues that companies are dealing with, real issues that firms are dealing with, right? This is not a made up problem, right? Yeah. So you're in Singapore. So what's the brief update there? Specifically in Singapore, we know talking about the transition risk, there are regulations, there are new laws that are going to impact a lot of the financial and other institutions that are really headquartered in Singapore.
There's the transition risk from Singapore itself, because you now have a carbon tax, which is at $5, is going up to $25 next year. And then it's going to go up beyond that. So that as we transition to a low carbon economy and you're going to see governments take action through carbon taxes, then that is going to impact the profitability of businesses. So that's happening on the ground in Singapore. But a lot of the companies that Singapore is investing in are throughout Southeast Asia. A lot of those are exporting to the US. They're exporting to the EU. So it's not just needing to know what's happening in Singapore. It's what is the EU going to do on a carbon border adjustment mechanism? Because that's impacting you in Singapore, even though it's happening in Brussels. What's the United States going to do when it comes to taxing carbon? So all of these issues are being felt in Singapore, both because of actions the Singapore government is taking, because they are very forward-looking and leaning on climate, but also what others are taking too.
Well, and I think, we see Singapore as such an important hub for all of this activity in Southeast Asia. We talked about this before, one of the first financial exchanges to have, I believe it was an ESG reporting requirement we talked about. Yes. And it's a hub for so many companies. Shall we move to the exciting announcement?
Sure.
So our exciting announcement today is that ClimeCo is shortly to be opening a Singapore office. So that's, if there's anything that gets us there to that space, right, it's this emphasis on a price on carbon, right? So when you're dealing with carbon markets, offsets, credits, all the things we do, it puts a price on carbon in a voluntary space. Or in a voluntary way, for example, for companies. We see the opportunities in Southeast Asia are just massive. Not only that side of things, but also from a nature-based impact perspective. So there's, so many mangrove restoration, which is one of the big areas that we're investing in, so much coastline right? And so many areas for impact with mangrove specifically, but with other types of nature preservation or conservation projects. I should say restoration too, because in some cases it's restoring. Our plastic credits, a lot of those are generated in Southeast Asia. So we're very excited as ClimeCo to be going to Singapore with your support, Steve.
Well, and you're saying it's if you think about Southeast Asia, right? Malaysia and Indonesia are two climate superpowers. And so being in Singapore in the center of Southeast Asia enables you to work in both of those countries as that dynamic moves forward. So there is such a need to get all of that waste out of the waters in Southeast Asia. And there's a real opportunity to do that with a market-based solution. And ClimeCo being on the forward edge of that is perfectly positioned to be in Southeast Asia to help solve that societal problem that is impacting all of us.
That and then the hard to abate sectors, of course. There's so much industry in India, in China, in Malaysia, all over, of course, all over the world now. But so much opportunity for both those emissions reductions that need to happen, the N2O projects. We do a lot with N2O abatement. So both the sort of nature, but also in the hard to abate sectors. So we're really excited about this. Folks that are listeners that are in Southeast Asia, please reach out. We're really excited to be opening an office in Singapore. And we're grateful for the support, your support, but also the support of Singapore itself. It's such a great place to do business. And we're really happy to be heading that way. And
everyone there is excited about the global best practices and the years and years of experience that is needed as Singapore becomes not just a regional hub, but a global hub for finance, a global hub for sustainability. And with ClimeCo at the intersection of both of those activities, Singapore is the perfect place.
Well, there you have it, folks. That's our announcement. Thank you so much, Steve. This was a short episode, but we're really happy to have you to be on this journey.
Well, great to be working with you and look forward to continuing to do so.
Absolutely.
This will be great.
Thanks, everyone.